Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. And this time, we are taking a look at Littlewood's Law of Miracles.
Oh, cool.
Um, and we'll be using the illustrated guide by David Christopher Lane
Oh, yeah.
as our jumping off point.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, have you ever thought that miracles are more common than we think they are?
Well, yeah. I mean,
Mm.
certainly more common than
Yeah.
sometimes you think.
So Littlewood's Law kind of addresses this head on,
Yeah.
by looking at probability and how it affects our daily lives.
Yeah, so Littlewood's basic thesis is that what we perceive as miracles is really kind of a byproduct of the sheer number of events that are happening all around us
Oh.
constantly.
So it's not like we're breaking the laws of nature. It's just that probability is kind of...
Right. It's not like you're defying the laws of physics,
Yeah.
but it's just that with enough events happening, statistically speaking, weird things will happen.
Gotcha.
And so Littlewood calculated that on average, we experience about 1 million events a month.
1 million events a month.
And if we define a miracle as a 1 in a million chance, then statistically speaking, we should be experiencing a miracle every month.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot of events that I mean, what exactly are we talking about when we say events?
Yeah, so it's pretty encompassing because you think about all the routine actions you perform each day, breathing and blinking and, walking, you're even scrolling on your phone. All of those contribute to this vast number of events that we experience.
Gotcha. So like just the little stuff really adds up.
Right.
Okay, so if all this is happening, why don't we notice it all the time?
Well, I think that that's a really important question. It's really a matter of perception. And we tend to filter out the mundane and focus on the unusual.
Okay.
It's kind of like if you were trying to find a particular grain of sand on a beach.
Yeah.
It's there, but it's lost in the vastness.
So our brains just aren't really designed to see every single one of these little events.
Right. And I think our brains are also designed to look for meaning in patterns. And so when something statistically improbable happens, we latch onto that and we label it a miracle.
Okay. So you're saying it's kind of a matter of perspective then?
Yeah, I think so. I think that it's our brains are really hardwired to look for patterns and meaning. And that's a good thing, generally speaking.
Yeah.
But it also means that we can sometimes see patterns where they don't actually exist.
Yeah, and that makes me think of Lane's concept of desultory decussation,
Right.
where these two seemingly random events kind of intersect in this meaningful way.
Yeah.
And he kind of describes it as spotting, an X pattern.
An X.
Yeah, in our lives. Have you ever noticed anything like that in your life?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've all had those moments where we, bump into someone unexpectedly or we come across a piece of information that just seems serendipitous.
Yeah.
And, those desultory decusations, I think, can feel very, very significant, even if they are statistically probable.
Yeah, and it's interesting how our own intentions play into that, because Lane tells a story in the book about going to a bookstore and looking for a specific edition of Anna Karenina.
Right.
And finding it right away.
Right.
Almost like he willed it into being there.
Well, and so it's a really good example of what we might call the intentionality fallacy.
Okay.
Which is that, we perceive external events as conforming to our internal desires.
Right. Yeah.
And we might be more likely to, notice and remember occurrences that align with our goals or our beliefs.
So it's not like we're, bending the universe to our will.
Right.
But it's more that we're just hyper aware of things that we are already,
Yeah, it's kind of like confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Where you tend to seek out and favor information that supports your preconceived notions.
Okay, so that makes sense. But I'm still wondering, does intention play any kind of role in this? I mean, did Lane find the book because he was looking for it, or is it just that he was paying more attention?
I think that's a great question. And I think it kind of leads us into some deeper waters.
Okay.
Because, if we start to look at things like apophenia and pareidolia,
Yeah.
we start to see how our minds can create meaning and patterns, even where none may exist.
Okay, hold on. Wait, let's break that down for everybody.
Yeah.
What is apophenia and pareidolia?
Yeah. So apophenia is the tendency to perceive connections and meaning between things that are not actually related.
Right.
And pareidolia is a specific type of apophenia where we see familiar images.
Okay.
In random patterns.
Okay.
So think about, you see Jesus on a piece of toast,
Yeah,
or you see a face on Mars.
Right. Yeah.
Those are all examples of pareidolia.
So it's like our brain just trying to make sense of something that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, our brains are incredibly efficient pattern recognition machines, and that's a good thing. It helps us navigate the world and avoid danger.
Right.
But it can also lead us astray when we apply it to random or chaotic data.
So how do we find that balance then?
Yeah.
Between, seeing these patterns and being, scientifically rigorous.
Yeah, well, this is where people like Richard Feynman come in.
Okay.
He always emphasized the importance of seeking out contradictory evidence,
Hmm.
constantly challenging your own assumptions, and being open to the possibility that you might be wrong.
Yeah, like a good scientist.
Right, exactly. And I think that's a really powerful approach, especially in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information and sensationalized claims.
Yeah, it's very easy to just get swept up in the excitement of something
Yeah.
without really looking at it critically.
And so that's where I think the real beauty of Littlewood's Law comes in, because I think it encourages us to embrace the wonder of those improbable events while also recognizing the role that probability and our own cognitive biases
Right.
play in shaping our perception.
So it's about finding that balance between awe and skepticism.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so that's really interesting. And I think the birthday paradox is a really good example of this. Yeah.
Can you remind everybody what the birthday paradox is?
Yeah, so the birthday paradox states that in a group of just 23 people, there's a 50% chance
23 people.
that two of them will share a birthday.
Really?
And if you increase that to 51 people, there's a 97% chance
Oh, wow, okay.
that two of them will share a birthday.
Why is that? I mean, that seems really counterintuitive.
It is counterintuitive. And
Yeah.
the reason for that is that we tend to frame the question incorrectly.
Okay.
We tend to focus on the probability of our birthday matching someone else's.
Right.
But the birthday paradox isn't about any one individual.
Gotcha.
It's about the probability of any two people
Right.
in the group sharing a birthday.
Okay, so it's not me finding someone else with my birthday.
Right.
It's anyone in the group matching anyone else.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
And so this same logic can be applied to those other improbable coincidences we encounter.
Okay.
It's not that these events are defying the laws of probability. It's that our intuition about probability is often flawed. Okay, I'm starting to get it. So speaking of these improbable coincidences, Lane also talks about license plate synchronicity.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this comes from the work of Elliot Benjamin, who's a mathematician.
Okay.
And he claims to have found two license plates in the Caribbean with remarkably similar numbers.
Wow. Okay.
And, he calculated the odds of this occurring by chance to be 1 in 20 million.
1 in 20 million? That's crazy.
Right. It sounds like it's really significant, right?
Yeah.
But as Lane points out, if you actively look for these types of amazing coincidences, you're bound to find them eventually.
Oh, so it's more about selective attention.
In a way, yeah, we tend to notice and remember those events that fit into our existing narratives or beliefs.
Okay, so to kind of prove his point, did Lane go out and try to find some of these matching numbers?
He did, and he tells a story in the book about how he found two cars parked right next to each other that had the exact same three-digit sequence on their license plates.
Wow, so he actually did it. So are you saying we don't need to explain these things with quantum physics or anything like that?
I think that that's exactly the point that Lane is trying to make.
Okay.
We don't need to invoke quantum physics or mystical explanations to account for these seemingly miraculous occurrences. Simple probability combined with our own human tendency to see patterns
Right.
is often enough to explain them.
Okay, so these meaningful coincidences may not be so meaningful after all.
I think it's not necessarily about dismissing the feeling of wonder or the significance these events can evoke, but it's more about recognizing the role our minds play in shaping our perceptions.
Okay.
Just because something feels meaningful doesn't automatically mean it requires a supernatural explanation.
Yeah, so again, it's about finding that balance between, being open to these things, but also
Wow.
being a little skeptical.
Yeah.
And I think a good illustration of this, or a good warning about being too focused on these things, is Lane brings up the Jorge Luis Borges short story, The Zahir,
Oh, yeah.
where a guy gets obsessed with a coin.
Yeah, he becomes dangerously obsessed.
What happens? I haven't read the story.
Right. Well, he becomes convinced that this coin holds some sort of key to unlocking the universe.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right? But it's really a cautionary tale about the potential pitfalls of reading too much into these random occurrences.
So again, we need to be careful we don't go too far down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's about finding that sweet spot between open-mindedness and critical thinking.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think Lane really encourages us to be aware of our tendency towards these things, apophenia, pareidolia,
Right.
while also remaining open to the possibility of the unexpected.
Okay, so it's like we're walking this tightrope.
Yeah.
Yeah, between embracing this wonder and staying grounded.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the real beauty of Littlewood's Law is it encourages us to approach life with a sense of curiosity and openness, recognizing that, statistically speaking, improbable things are bound to happen.
Okay, so what does this all mean for us, as we go about our daily lives?
Well, I think one thing it suggests is that we maybe shouldn't be so quick to dismiss coincidences
Okay.
as mere chance.
Yeah.
Maybe there's more to them than meets the eye. But at the same time, we need to be mindful of our tendency to project meaning onto random events.
Right. If you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebra.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance
Yeah.
between acknowledging the possibility of the extraordinary while also remaining grounded in the probable.
Okay, so as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into Littlewood's Law,
Yeah.
what's one key takeaway you want people to think about?
I would leave you with this thought-provoking question. If we were truly aware of the vast number of events happening all around us all the time, would we be more or less likely to be surprised by miracles when they occur?
That's a good one.
It makes you kind of wonder if the real miracle is not the improbable event itself, but our capacity to
Yeah.
perceive meaning and connection
Right.
amidst the flux of existence.
That's a great question to sit with for a little bit.
Yeah.
We'll be back in just a moment to continue exploring Littlewood's Law and how it intersects with our everyday lives.
So that question of whether we'd be, more or less surprised by miracles if we were aware of all the events happening,
Yeah.
it really gets at the heart of how we interpret the world.
It does, and I'm still thinking about it. It's like if we were aware of all the times our heart beats or, all the steps we take,
Right.
would those still feel miraculous?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating thought experiment.
Yeah.
And it really ties into Littlewood's point that with enough events, even the improbable becomes almost inevitable.
So again, it's not about the event itself, it's about how we're perceiving it.
Yeah, and that perception, I think, is often shaped by our desires, our beliefs, and even our cultural context.
Right, and I was thinking about that, as you were talking about that, look how different cultures
Yeah.
interpret signs and symbols. And,
Right.
one thing might be lucky in one culture, but a bad sign in another.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Our interpretations of events are always filtered through our own unique lens.
Yeah.
And that lens is shaped by, all sorts of things, other personal experiences, cultural norms, and even our evolutionary history.
Right, and speaking of, cultural interpretations and things, Lane also talks about people finding hidden codes and messages in religious texts.
Yeah.
And that seems like a prime example of apophenia.
It is. The Bible code is, sort of the classic example.
Right.
People have claimed to find, predictions of future events
Oh, yeah.
hidden within the text of the Bible.
I remember hearing about that, and it was very controversial.
It was very controversial, and I think it highlights the importance of critical thinking when it comes to these sorts of claims.
Right.
While it's tempting to see patterns and meaning everywhere, we need to be cautious about jumping to conclusions.
Right. So how do we find that balance
Right.
between being open to these things, but also, not getting carried away?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, and there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
But I think, one thing to consider is the source of the information,
Okay.
the methods used to arrive at those conclusions.
Right.
Are the claims based on, solid evidence, or are they just speculation?
Right.
Have alternative explanations been considered?
And this reminds me of, what we were talking about earlier with Feynman and,
Yes.
looking for contradictory evidence, because it's very easy to just get caught up in the excitement of like,
Right.
oh my gosh, this is a new discovery.
It's a natural human tendency.
Yeah, but we need to be willing to challenge our own assumptions.
Right. We're all susceptible to confirmation bias.
Yeah.
But I think if we really want to understand the world around us,
Yeah.
we need to be willing to challenge our own assumptions and consider different perspectives.
So it's not about, rejecting the extraordinary. It's about approaching it with,
Right.
healthy amount of skepticism.
Exactly. Finding that balance between open-mindedness
Right.
and intellectual rigor.
Yeah. And going back to Littlewood's Law,
Yeah.
even if we accept the fact that, improbable events are going to happen,
Right.
it doesn't mean that we have to lose the wonder that we feel.
That's a really important point, I think.
Yeah.
Just because we understand the math behind probability
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean we have to lose that sense of magic and mystery.
Yeah, like the universe is still a very vast and complex place.
The universe is a vast and complex place, and there's still so much that we don't know.
Right.
And even if we can explain some events through the lens of probability, there will always be those occurrences that
Yeah.
leave us scratching our heads.
Yeah, and wondering, like, what's really going on.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's always another.
There's always another layer to peel back, another mystery to explore.
Yeah.
That's what makes life so fascinating.
So how can we apply these insights to our everyday lives?
Well, I think one thing is it encourages us to be more mindful of the present moment,
Okay.
and to pay attention to those seemingly insignificant events
Yeah.
that make up our days.
Right.
Um, it also, I think, invites us to be more open to the unexpected
Okay.
and to embrace the possibility of serendipity.
It sounds like a recipe for a more joyful life.
It certainly could be. And I think it also ties back into, Lane's idea of desultory decussation.
Yeah.
If we're more attuned to the patterns and connections that emerge in our lives,
Okay.
we might be more likely to spot those meaningful intersections.
So it's about actively, seeking out those X's.
Yeah, exactly. Engaging with the world around us with a sense of curiosity and wonder.
I like that it's like we're explorers in our own lives.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah. So as we go even further into Littlewood's Law, what are some of the pitfalls?
Yeah.
Like, what do we need to watch out for?
I think one potential pitfall is, becoming overly fixated on finding meaning in every single event.
Hmm.
It's important to remember that not every coincidence is a sign from the universe.
Right.
Sometimes, things just happen.
Yeah, we don't want to see patterns where they don't exist.
Exactly. And I think it's also important to be mindful of confirmation bias.
Yeah.
If we're constantly searching for evidence to support our existing beliefs, we might miss out on important information
Right.
that challenges those beliefs.
Okay, so again, it's all about balance,
Right.
being open but also skeptical.
Exactly.
So Lane also talks about license plate synchronicity.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this concept comes from the work of Elliot Benjamin, who's a mathematician.
Okay.
And he believes in the significance of finding license plates with similar numbers.
Yeah, I've heard about this. People see repeating numbers
Right.
on license plates, clocks, even like receipts, and they think that it's like,
Yeah.
the universe trying to tell them something.
That's a common interpretation,
Yeah.
but I think Lane takes a more skeptical approach. He argues that these seemingly improbable coincidences can often be explained by simple probability and our tendency to seek out patterns.
Okay, so he's not saying that people aren't having these experiences.
Right.
But maybe there's just a simpler explanation.
That's right. And he points out that if we're actively looking for these types of patterns, we're bound to find them.
Right.
It's a bit like the Texas sharpshooter fallacy.
What's that?
You draw a target around a cluster of bullet holes after you've already fired the shots.
Oh, so it's like we're creating the meaning after the fact.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And to illustrate this point, Lane talks about his own experience where he actually went out
Really?
and he found two cars parked next to each other that had the exact same 3-digit sequence on their license plates.
Wow. So it's not as uncommon as we think.
Right.
Okay. And it also makes me think, like how many times do we miss these things
Right.
because we're just not paying attention?
Absolutely. Our perception is very selective.
Right.
We tend to notice those things that confirm our existing beliefs or those things that stand out as unusual.
So it's not that they're not happening, it's just that we're not seeing them.
Exactly. And I think that's where, that notion of intentionality comes into play.
Right.
If we're actively seeking something out, we're more likely to notice it when it appears.
Like when you buy a new car and then suddenly you see that car everywhere.
That's the classic example.
Yeah.
Our brains are wired to filter out information that's not relevant to our immediate needs or goals.
Okay. So how do we square all of this with the idea of miracles then?
Well, I think it comes back to the idea that our perception of an event is just as important as the event itself.
So again, not denying that these things are happening,
Right.
but just understanding that our mind is playing a role.
Right. And that's where I think the beauty of Littlewood's Law lies.
Okay.
It encourages us to embrace the wonder of the unexpected while also recognizing the power of our own perceptions.
This has been a really great conversation. I'm starting to look at the world a little differently now.
Yeah, me too.
But is there anything else you want to add about Littlewood's Law?
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind that, Littlewood's Law is a mathematical model.
Okay.
And it can't predict the future or tell us for certain whether or not something is truly a miracle.
Right.
But it does offer a valuable framework, I think, for understanding probability
Right.
and how it plays out in our lives.
It's a tool for us to use, not an answer.
Exactly.
And speaking of big questions,
Yeah.
we're going to explore some of the more philosophical and spiritual implications
Hmm.
of Littlewood's Law after a short break, so stay with us. Okay, so we're back and ready to, dive even deeper into Littlewood's Law.
Okay.
And I think it's interesting to think about how this mathematical concept, kind of intersects with the big questions of life, like
Yeah.
meaning and purpose and even spirituality.
Yeah, it certainly does raise some, intriguing philosophical questions.
Yeah.
If we accept this premise that statistically improbable events are bound to happen,
Yeah.
given enough time and opportunity, it really does challenge those traditional notions of what constitutes a miracle.
Yeah, like maybe we're too quick to say, oh, it's a miracle,
Right.
when maybe it's just, probability.
Right. And it kind of aligns with a more, naturalistic
Right.
worldview where, we try to understand the universe
Right?
through the lens of science and reason.
Yeah.
But even within that framework, there's still room, I think, for awe and wonder.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just because we can explain it doesn't mean
Right.
that it's not still amazing.
Exactly. Like, take the Grand Canyon, for example.
Yeah.
We understand the geological processes that led to its formation,
Right.
but that doesn't diminish, the awe that we feel
Yeah.
when we stand at its rim and gaze upon its vastness.
That's a great analogy.
Right.
Yeah, and so it's like we can appreciate the science of it,
Right.
but also the feeling that it gives us.
Exactly. And I think Littlewood's Law kind of invites us to adopt a similar perspective
Okay.
when it comes to those seemingly miraculous events in our lives.
Yeah.
We can acknowledge the role of probability
Right.
while also, appreciating the mystery and the wonder that surrounds them.
So it's not about choosing one or the other.
Why
It's
not?
about finding a way to hold both.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's about embracing the complexity of the universe
Yeah.
and recognizing that, our human minds may never fully grasp
Right.
all of its secrets.
Yeah, and this reminds me of something that Lane said in his book.
Okay.
He said that, the real miracle isn't the event itself.
Right.
It's our ability to perceive it and to, find meaning in it.
Yeah, that's a really profound insight, and I think it shifts the focus from the external event to our internal experience.
Yeah.
And it suggests that, maybe the true source of wonder lies within us,
Oh, wow. Okay.
in our capacity for awareness, for curiosity, for meaning making,
It's like we have the power.
to decide,
It's a miracle.
it's like we're given permission to find the extraordinary in the ordinary,
Yeah.
to see the magic in the mundane.
So it's like instead of waiting for this, huge thing to happen,
Right.
we can just appreciate the little things.
Exactly. Cultivating that sense of wonder and gratitude for those simple things.
Yeah.
The warmth of the sun on our skin, the laughter of a loved one,
Right.
the beauty of a sunset.
It's like those things are always available to us.
Exactly. Those are the kinds of miracles that are readily available to us if we just open ourselves to receiving them.
That's a beautiful message. I really like that.
Yeah.
It's like we don't have to wait for these, big improbable things to happen
Right.
to feel that sense of awe and wonder. That like
Exactly.
the miracle is just being alive.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
And I think that's a perfect place to, wrap up our deep dive into Littlewood's Law.
Yeah.
So to our listeners, embrace these insights.
Mm.
Be open to the unexpected, but also don't forget to be a little bit skeptical.
Absolutely.
Seek out those X patterns in your life, but also don't force them where they don't belong.
Right.
And above all, remember that, the true miracle is our ability to experience life
Yeah.
in all of its beauty and complexity.
Well said. And thank you for joining us on this fascinating deep dive.
Yeah.
We hope it's sparked some new ideas and maybe inspired you to look at the world
Yeah.
with a fresh perspective.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning,
Yes.
and keep embracing the wonders of this improbable and extraordinary universe that we live in.
Absolutely.